Hello, welcome to Racialization and Society. I hope that you've enjoyed the class thus far. The class has been taught largely from a feminist perspective, and we've also discussed intersectionality and also intersectional approaches to feminism and also queer people of color and transgender rights in detail. So, in this additional lecture, I'm going to talk about race and technology, and I'm going to draw on the scholarship of Alicia Lim. And Alicia Lim has published an article called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Facebook, Updating Identity Economics. So, the author looks at this online social media platform, Facebook, um, and draws on Max Weber's writings regarding the relationship between uh, what Weber termed the Protestant ethic. And Lim argues that Facebook activism, quote, thrives on deep-rooted Christian paradigms of dogma, virtue, redemption, and piety. As dogmatic personal identity economics spread across the globe, Alicia Lim states that, quote, they testify to how Facebook's business model manufactures bad actors. So I will share my screen and discuss this article and the relationship between race and technology in more detail. I hope that you're doing well, and I hope that you have enjoyed the class. So Alicia Lim draws on Max Weber's writing, and Weber wrote this treatise in 1905, The Protestant Ethic in the Spirit of Capitalism, which argued that puritanical values propelled capitalist enterprise. Weber was writing 300 years after Calvinist asceticism, and he argued that it kicked off capitalism thanks to doctrines of predestination, virtue, delayed gratification, and paranoia. 3 centuries later, he recorded these ideas in the persisting belief that vocation, devotion, and individualistic ambition entitle one to financial wealth and success. His argument has held over the past century as lifestyle ad campaigns continue to prey on a sense of iniquity, virtue, vocation, entitlement, and salvation. However, modern social media platforms have perfected this aesthetic propriety by injecting ranking logic into intimate personal online sociality. To take seriously Weber's spirit of capitalism, the more that Facebook algorithms promote a vigilant sense of pious morality in the vein of 17th century asceticism, the more they generate friction-free capital flow. So the sense of kind of piety and renunciation of desire and also regulation and repression are central to Lim's arguments about Facebook activism, call out culture, and self presentation on the internet as having these virtues of self effacement, self sacrifice, and righteousness. So, this is a clip about Max Weber.
Max Weber is one of the philosophers best able to explain to us the peculiar economic system we live within called capitalism. Born in
For some reason, my screen share is paused. Sorry. Let me try again.
Grammarly. When you're working on yet another cover letter for that internship, and it starts to sound a little. Max Weber is one of the philosophers best able to explain to us the peculiar economic system we live within called capitalism. Born in Erfurt in Germany in 1864, Weber grew up to see his country convulsed by the dramatic changes of the Industrial Revolution. Cities were exploding in size, vast companies were forming, a new managerial elite was replacing the old aristocracy. Weber spent his life analyzing these changes, and he developed some key ideas with which we can better understand the workings and future of capitalism. The standard view is that capitalism began as a result of developments in technology, especially steam power. But Weber proposed something more interesting, that what actually made capitalism possible was a set of ideas, and in particular, religious ideas. And not just any religious ideas. Capitalism was created by Protestantism, specifically Calvinism. In his great work, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1905, Weber laid out some of the reasons why he believed Protestant Christianity had been so crucial to capitalism. In Weber's analysis, Catholics have it relatively easy. They're able to confess their transgressions at regular intervals and can be cleansed by priests. But no such purifications are available to Protestants, who believe that only God is able to forgive anyone, and he won't make his intentions known until the day of judgment. Until then, Weber alleged, Protestants are left with heightened feelings of anxiety, as well as lifelong guilty desires to prove their virtue to a severe, all-seeing, but silent God. In Weber's eyes, Protestant feelings of guilt were diverted into an obsession with hard work. This was what he called the Protestant work ethic. The sins of Adam could only be expunged through constant toil. Not coincidentally, there were far fewer festivals and days of rest in Protestantism. God didn't like time off. Catholics had limited their conception of holy work to the activities of priests, monks, and nuns. But now, Protestants declared that work of any kind could be done in the name of God, even jobs like being a baker or an accountant. This lent new moral energy and earnestness to all branches of professional life. In Catholic countries, the family was, and often still is, everything. But Protestants took a less benevolent view of family. The family could be a haven for selfish and egoistic motives. For early Protestants, one was meant to direct one's selfless energies to the community as a whole, the public realm where everyone deserved fairness and dignity. Protestantism and eventually scientific capitalism turned its back on miracles. Weber called this the disenchantment of the world. So prosperity wasn't to be thought of as something mysteriously ordained by God. It could only be the result of thinking methodically, acting honestly, and working industriously and sensibly over many years. Without a belief in miracles, people turned to science for explanations and changes, which encouraged scientific investigation and discovery, and eventually technological booms. Taken together, these 5 factors created in Weber's eyes the crucial catalytic ingredients for capitalism to take hold. Marx had argued that religion was the opium of the masses, a drug that induced passive acceptance of the horrors of capitalism. But Weber turned this dictum on its head. People didn't tolerate capitalism because of religion. They only became capitalists as a result of their religion. There are about 35 countries where capitalism is now well developed. It probably works best in Germany, where Weber first observed it. But in the remaining 161 nations, it arguably isn't working very well at all. This is a source of much puzzlement and distress. Billions of dollars in aid are transferred every year from the rich to the poor parts of the world. But a Weberian analysis tells us that these materialist interventions will never work, because the problem isn't really a material one to begin with. Instead, certain countries for Weber fail to succeed at capitalism because they don't feel anxious and guilty enough. They trust too much in miracles. They like to celebrate now rather than invest in tomorrow. And their members feel it's acceptable to steal from the community in order to enrich their families, favoring the clan over the nation. Today, Weber would counsel those who wish to spread capitalism to concentrate on our equivalent of religion, culture. It's a nation's attitudes, hopes, and a sense of what life is about that produces an economy that either flourishes or flounders. To reduce poverty, Weber would say, one has to start at the level of ideas. What the World Bank and the IMF should be giving sub-Saharan Africa is not, in a Weberian analysis, money and technology, but a new outlook. The decisive question for an economy should not be what the rate of inflation is, but what's on TV tonight. Weber was writing in an age of revolution. He too wanted things to change, but he believed that one first had to work out how political power operated. Weber believed that humanity had gone through three distinct types of power. The older societies operated according to what he called traditional authority, where kings relied on folklore and divinity to justify their power. Then came the age of charismatic authority, where a heroic individual, most famously Napoleon, could rise to power with a magnetic personality and change everything through passion and will. However, Weber explained that we had now entered a third age of bureaucratic authority. Bureaucracy achieves its power via knowledge. Only the bureaucrats know how stuff works, and it will take an outsider years to work it out. Most of us simply give up, usefully for the powers that be. The dominance of bureaucracy has major implications for anyone trying to change a nation. There is often an understandable but misguided desire to think that one just has to change the leader. But in fact, removing a leader almost never has the degree of impact that is hoped for. If we're to get things to go better, much of it will have to come through outwardly rather undramatic bureaucratic processes. It will come through the marshalling of statistical evidence, patient briefings to ministers, testimonies to committee hearings, and a minute study of budgets. Weber tells us how power works now and reminds us that ideas may be far more important than tools or money in changing nations. It's a hugely significant thesis. With Weber's guidance, we learn that so much which we associate with vast, impersonal, external forces is in fact dependent upon something utterly intimate and perhaps more malleable, the thoughts in our own heads.
So, like Marx, as a sociologist, Max Weber was interested in ideology. And ideology is a Marxist concept, and it often refers to what we do without necessarily knowing what we are doing or what we participate in rather unknowingly, like capitalism. So, for Marx, um, the ruling ideology is the ideology of the ruling class, that we often validate ideas, language, lifestyles, ways of understanding the law that benefit property owners as opposed to those who do not own property and are the working class or the poor of any society. So Lim's article then discusses the relationship between identity politics and capitalism by looking at social media and specifically Facebook. And so Alicia Lim states that it is not just that something like an identity politics can and has been placed on the side of states. We see political strategies of radical social struggle made over into programs, sets of procedures for the civil service sector of global imperial democracy. When do we critique, sorry, when we do the critique that we do so well, do we not employ the grammar of the police or the slave trader and auctioneer? Of the entrepreneur and the investor? Do we not communicate and traffic in the particular colonial capitalist real abstract codes of social and subjective being that make up an American grammar? So in using these tools of technology, do we replicate the ideology of the ruling class, those who own these tools? And Lim is critical of the ways that activism, social justice, self-expression, And seemingly left-wing gestures and word and image are actually supporting major corporations and specifically um, Facebook and other um, internet mediums that have a monopoly on communication in our time period. Social media is an increasingly mandatory public sphere that touches all personal human interactions with the logic of marketing and commercial promotion. The resulting atmosphere breeds the paranoia and intolerance of hate rallies and nationalist movements that make headlines, but it also contributes to self-conscious performances of piety, purification, and renunciation. My personal identity economics came with a trade-off. I became defined by who I hate. Millions like me coagulate into radical group dynamics and a banal daily fear of saying the wrong thing. So Lim reflects upon emotions and politics that arise from using social media. So social media, while seemingly um, open and accessible to all, uh, is also obviously owned by very wealthy economic investors. Um, Social media is also a platform where hate groups can organize. Um, and Lim specifically discusses this kind of conscious performance of piety, purity, and renunciation that one often makes online, specifically as an activist. Puritanical virtue signaling persists on social media, as do the other Christian convictions of value and worth. Black feminist scholars Tanya Sutherland and Noble argue that viral social media activism, like the circulations of videos of anti-Black police violence, is a futile social justice spectacle that does not actually challenge racist laws or policies. Facebook ranking systems are not activist tools, but lucrative marketing atmospheres of pious expertise and redemption. So this posting of videos and speech acts, text, and image online might signal piety and redemption, but it does not really change law or police procedures. It doesn't really affect the economic realities of class antagonism and class struggle that compromise the quality of certain lives. Uh, so this is a clip of Dr. Alicia, and it's a TED Talk. So Dr. Lim's work examines the relationship then between technology and identity, and uh, Lim's work looks at the ways that there are obviously costs in using the tools of the internet like social media for social movement organizing. And in the past, a lot of social movement organizing would have relied upon actual um, real life interactions and some sense of community that involved material responsibility. And now a lot of social movement activism could perhaps be thought of not as activism, but as self-branding of different um, subjects whose identities could become marketable as political symbols or tools without any real connection to an actual working class habitus. And so it is interesting to think about the ways that class um, and class identities are connected to identity politics and the branding of marginality. So Pierre Bourdieu was a sociologist who discussed the term cultural capital. And cultural capital refers to non-financial assets. So how does one know that someone is middle class? In this time period, one doesn't really, uh, and in this context, say of advanced capitalism or accelerated capitalist societies and urban societies, one does not really see someone carrying like gold bricks or gold with them. The sense that one could know that someone is middle class is not really about capital. We don't really show people how much capital we have. You can't see someone's bank account. So cultural capital for Bourdieu refers to the ways that people signify class. In ways that are not just about money or finance. So if someone utilizes a certain grammar in the English language, then it is perhaps a sign that they have had an education, a middle class education. The use of the English language and English language terms could be a sign of cultural capital. Clothing, dress, mannerisms, all of these um, can be markers of cultural capital. Product knowledge, knowing what neighborhoods to live in or what things to buy could be signs of cultural capital. The use of social media and social media etiquette and ways of promoting oneself online could also be a form of cultural capital. So while internet activism um, might be and is perhaps convenient and useful and has wide-reaching effects, and I mean, there are many really exemplary uses of hashtags like Black Lives Matter. There are also uh, a lot of interesting uses of transnational social media to promote international causes. However, uh, the question becomes whether or not this use of social media really promotes activism or whether it leads to the promotion of deeper forms of class antagonism because of anxieties regarding successful branding of one's identity. So in Marxist theory, society is divided into these two layers, the base and the superstructure. The base of society forms the economic foundation, how goods are produced, while the superstructure consists of the political, legal, and cultural institutions that arise from and legitimize that base. So the base for Marx refers to the economic structure of society, and these are the forces of production, the actual materials, the actual technology, and then the relations of production are how things are actually made. So if we were to think about technology from the perspective of the first level of Marxist analysis, which is the economic structure of society or the base, then we would think about technological tools. How are computers made? What kind of parts are used? Where are they made? The superstructure rests on top of the economic foundation. And this level of economics for Marx encompasses all non-economic aspects of society, including political institutions, ideology, culture, and art. So Karl Marx is interested in the relationship between the base and the superstructure. And Marx argues that everyday relations of production, the way that technological tools are made, the proliferation of the making of, say, iPhones or computers, specifically not only in North America, but in export processing zones or sweatshops in the global south might influence the superstructure, how our political institutions, our ideas, our culture, art are shaped by these technological tools. And for Marxists, superstructures, ideas, political institutions, media can also influence um, how things are produced. So the base informs the superstructure, but the superstructure can also inform the base. While the economic base is the dominant force in the long run, the superstructure can also circle back and influence the base. For example, political revolutions or new cultural movements, elements of the superstructure, can fundamentally disrupt and reshape economic systems. So when people say protest against the building of a pipeline, this is ideological and political in nature. It is an idea that is part of our superstructure. However, it can affect everyday relations of production. Massive protests can prevent people from using transportation or from buying or selling or making things. So I'll finish this lecture by discussing post-racialism. The point with thinking about Marx and these ideas of superstructure and base is to think about technology and the relationship between the making of technological tools, um, the actual materials, and who makes these computers and who makes these phones and superstructure. And there have been, in the last, I guess, 10 or 10 or 15 years, there have been a lot of news media articles about Chinese workers who work for Foxconn and iPhone. And there have been a lot of reports about suicide in these factories where people make iPhone uh, and Apple products. So this kind of economic base, which allows technological tools to be produced in conditions of extreme labor exploitation in Asia and throughout the global south, also then structures the ways that we kind of casually can use technology in everyday aspects of our lives and often cheaply in the global north. So I'll finish by discussing post-racialism. Ruha Benjamin has written an interesting text about race and technology, and the book is about technology and what the author terms the new Jim Crow. So, Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code, is a 2019 American nonfiction book by Ruha Benjamin, and it focuses on a range of ways in which social hierarchies, particularly racism, is embedded in the logical layer of internet-based technologies. So, what Benjamin argues is that so what Benjamin argues, is that seemingly neutral algorithms and applications can replicate or worsen racial bias. So while technology seems neutral, it is obviously not. From the making of technological tools in factories in China where young workers often commit suicide or commit suicide in high numbers, um, in comparison to other areas of employment in China, to the kind of ways that the algorithm attaches itself to certain images and bodies and names and not others. Technology is not neutral, argues Ruha Benjamin. What's ultimately distinctive about race after technology is that its withering critiques of the present are so galvanizing. The field that the author maps is treacherous and phantasmatic, full of obstacles and tripwires whose strength lies in their invisibility. And so technology often seems neutral or invisible, but Ruha Benjamin's work um, offers this inventive and wide-ranging analysis, which reminds us that as much as we try to purge ourselves from our tools and view them as external to our flaws, they are always extensions of us. So, racial technologies, in other words, are in the business of manufacturing natures. As with the fabrication of urban green spaces, post-racial environments are ones in which the pleasure of some is predicated on the misery of others. Like those signs that litter public streets, no standing any time. This is an ideology of forward motion, always on the go, no loitering, lest one begin to reflect or remember that you were forcibly dislocated to make space for urban renewal. Those who dwell, whether to assert rights or seek redress, are accused of wrongdoing, of imposing artificial equality onto those who naturally only want to revitalize the neighborhood, writes Ruha Benjamin. So, if we think about technologies as spaces and places, then who can congregate and loiter in these spaces and places, and who is asked to leave, is really interesting. If we think about also the relationship between space, place, and race, class, and segregation, specifically in the United States of America, but globally, who can and cannot occupy certain places, sit in certain spaces, has always been a historical question about race, slavery, and segregation. So technology is also space. So technologies could be thought of as neutral, as at a distance from our bodies. However, technologies can also be thought of in relation to eugenics. Medical technologies are technologies. Is it possible that seemingly neutral medical technologies could also be used against certain minority populations? And in previous lectures, I've discussed the class action lawsuit that has been filed against Canadian healthcare providers in every province by Indigenous women who have accused Canadian nurses and doctors of forcible sterilization. So, gene editing, for example, is a form of technology. Is it possible that these technological tools, which allow one to edit genes or to manipulate nature, could be used to um, enact a program uh, against certain minority populations and in favor of white supremacy or even neo-Nazism? One need only to look to the number of people getting double eyelid surgeries and narrowing nose jobs, yet hardly ever the reverse, to understand that personal choice with respect to altering human bodies obscures the way that dominant ideologies shape the direction of preference. In that way, analogizing genetic modification to cosmetic surgery may indeed be apt, but only if we understand how both sets of techniques invigorate hegemonic forms of whiteness. So, the universalization of the English language and of certain aesthetics of certain types of bodies on the internet could actually further fascism. So this is a clip of Ruha Benjamin. And it's another TED Talk.
With PowerBox Cleopatra, you could win big in store. And you could win big in the 100K nightly draw. One ticket, two chances to win big with OLG's PowerBox Cleopatra.
That is Ruha Benjamin. Um, this work looks at race and technology. And what is interesting to think about is how Benjamin's work really addresses or critiques a body of scholarship about post-racialism. So post-racialism or the post-racial myth is an ideological framework that describes a society in which racial prejudice no longer exists and a person's race is no longer a factor in their social, political, or economic standing. And so many scholars discuss the ways that post-racialism would occur because of changes in the class structure. So the rise of middle class people of color. Also, technology was thought about in as a way that post or as a catalyst for post-racialism. However, what Ruha Benjamin um, argues is that technology is not neutral and that technology can actually exacerbate racism and other inequalities. So post-racialism really gained massive prominence in 2008 following the election of Barack Obama as the first Black president of the United States. And in the context of America, this was seen as kind of a great achievement and a sign that race was no longer a tenable issue or a point of conflict. And obviously, academic critics were really critical of the ways that that electoral politics don't really change class struggle and rates of, say, unemployment and poverty among Indigenous people and people of color throughout North America. And obviously, the most recent elections of the Republican Party have involved a lot of race baiting and debates regarding immigration, citizenship, and skin color. What academics who write about technology have also discussed at great length are the ways that technology has also become central to policing. So, facial recognition technologies, voice recognition technologies, tools of surveillance can be used to police specifically ethnic minority communities. And what researchers have found is that in Toronto, disproportionate arrests and charges of Black people have been the subject of multiple reports and studies for over 30 years. And so this disproportionate likelihood of stopping and searching young Black people and Black Canadians in general, and also incarcerating Indigenous and Black people is a finding that is statistically true for the last several decades. Proportionate to their number in court, Black defendants are significantly more likely than white or other racial minority accused to face at least one drug or weapons charge. The study also shows that these types of charges are significantly more likely to have arisen from proactive than reactive policing. According to these data, 77% of the cases resulting in at least one drug or weapon charge, but only 37% of other cases stem from proactive policing activity. So, racial profiling technology refers to the use of artificial intelligence surveillance and data analytics tools that disproportionately target, monitor, or misidentify individuals based on race or ethnicity. These technologies, often deployed in policing and border control, can automate and amplify existing systemic racism by encoding biases into algorithms. So, technology has also been used as part of a whole apparatus of biometrics and citizenship. And citizenship and biometrics is obviously a huge industry. The scanning of passports, the use of fingerprints to um, confirm one's identity is all really technologically driven. And there are a lot of debates regarding the effectiveness of technology in uh, appraising claims of citizenship or visas. These tools can be used as tools of surveillance, but they can also be um, tampered with. And uh, obviously, one could imagine that someone could use different technological tools to commit crime, and specifically crimes regarding identity, visas, passports, student visas. At the same time, it is also possible to think about the ways that um, migrants, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, international students could also be policed, detained, um, accused of crimes that they did not commit because of technological tools. There are a whole series of technologies that have been introduced in policing that involve the recognition of skin color and facial recognition. And obviously, these technological tools have been critiqued. And we have discussed the murder of George Floyd and anti-Black racism in policing, as well as police discrimination against other minority populations, or other subaltern populations throughout the class. So what researchers have found is that in Detroit, multiple Black men were wrongfully arrested based on faulty facial recognition matches. In New York City, the police department has been criticized for using surveillance to track individuals with a high concentration of cameras in Black and Latinx neighborhoods. Internationally, reports have surfaced of the Chinese government using facial recognition specifically to track and profile Uyghur Muslims. And so the use of these technological tools, data and surveillance can further solidify racial antagonism and ethnic cleansing. So Ashwini KP is the UN Special Rapporteur on contemporary forms of racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance. And Ashwini KP has written that there is an enduring and harmful notion that technology is neutral and objective. In her report, she explores how this assumption is allowing artificial intelligence to perpetuate racial discrimination. Generative AI is changing the world and has the potential to drive increasingly societal shifts in the future. I am deeply concerned about the rapid spread of the application of artificial intelligence across various fields. This is not because artificial intelligence is without potential benefits. In fact, it presents possible opportunities for innovation and inclusion. Predictive policing can exacerbate the historical over-policing of communities along racial and ethnic lines, says Ashwini KP. Because law enforcement officials have historically focused their attention on such neighborhoods, members of communities in those neighborhoods are overrepresented in police records. This, in turn, has an impact on where algorithms predict that future crime will occur, leading to increased police deployment in the areas in question. When officers in over-policed neighborhoods record new offenses, a feedback loop is created whereby the algorithm generates increasingly biased predictions targeting these neighborhoods. In short, bias from the past leads to bias in the future. And this is Ashwini KP from the UN. So I will finish with this quote from Ruha Benjamin. Those who monopolize resources monopolize imagination. So I hope that you enjoyed the lecture, and I hope that you've enjoyed the other recorded lectures and the content for this class, Racialization and Society. I also hope that the readings have been accessible and that the course enhances your academic career and supports your future academic and career interests. I will post another video next week before the exam, reviewing some of our course materials and describing in more detail what the format for the exam will be and how you can prepare. Thank you very much for your participation in the class. Cheers. Bye.